Welcome to a pre-recorded webinar, Essential Values of ERP, providing the visibility and insights to evaluate your business. The speaker for this presentation is Steve Bazat from DELMIAworks. We hope you enjoy the webinar.
Hi, everybody. This is Steve. This presentation is called the Essential Values of ERP. It's actually something I put together a few months ago because I thought that the message on ERP had become too complex for some people. So this presentation is for people who don't consider themselves like 20-year experts in ERP. People that are new to ERP, people that perhaps don't have an ERP system in their business, people are thinking about an ERP system. And it's mainly focused around, the 8 essential values are basically, if you pay the money for an ERP system, how do you get your money back? What's the ROI on an ERP system, and help you build your own ROI calculations if you pursue a system of this nature. First off, I'd like to say that, DELMIAworks, at an overview level, we make ERP for manufacturers. We sometimes call it MES2. MES is basically an enterprise resource planning system, but it's the shop floor piece of it, and I'll explain that in more detail. We focus on discrete and batch process manufacturers. We don't do continuous flow manufacturing like chemical or petroleum or anything like that. Our product, our go-to-market, our strategy, our team is sized for the mid-market, companies between, say, $10 million and $500 million. Occasionally, we service divisions of Fortune 1000 companies where they've got 2 or 3 or 4 plants that are producing a certain product, and they don't need a big SAP type of system or an Oracle type of system. Now we've got about 1,000 customers, actually it's about 1,100 now. We were founded in 1989 by a manufacturing engineer who wrote the original code set to automate his own manufacturing operation. 325 employees. We're headquartered in Paso Robles, California, which is where I am now. And we were acquired by Dassault Systems in January of 2019. We all know Dassault Systems is Dassault Aerospace, for jet fighters and Mirage jets and stuff like that. But Dassault Systems is a software provider to the manufacturing industry. And the product that most of the people on this call are probably most familiar with is SolidWorks, 3D design software. And the strategy of being acquired by Dassault was that we could combine the design side of the house with the actual manufacturing side of the house and get an end-to-end solution from design all the way through the manufacturing operations. I talked about essential values. I'm going to go through 8 of them. And I also talked about the fact that this is a great starting point to help justify and select an ERP system. This is not an all-encompassing presentation on every last bit of what's in an ERP system, but again, a starter presentation for those who want to become not expert, but well-informed about what to look for in a base ERP package. ERP it's basically this. It's accounting. It's your order management, your material resource planning, which often includes inventory, purchasing, and scheduling, or kind of the way people think about that. There's a human relationship management, HR systems component to most ERP systems, a customer relationship management system, and a warehouse management system. And then all ERPs contain some form of reporting and business intelligence, and most some sort of document management. So if you add all those up together, you fundamentally get the management platform for a business, and it can be for a manufacturer, it can be for a distributor, it can be for a retailer, it can be for a bank or an insurance company, for all that matters. But what we focus on is ERP for manufacturers. And given that it's for manufacturing, there's another aspect of it which is known in the industry as MES, or manufacturing execution software. And this is very, very close to the production floor, where you're actually monitoring the production rates of machines. You're watching the schedules, and you're watching as things get started and as they complete and when they will be done. And if the schedule changes, then it's updating the machines and everything and rejiggering the factory floor to deal with the reality of what's going on down there. process monitoring, which is measuring temperatures and pressures and various process parameters coming from machine, the maintenance, repair, and overhaul of the machines and the tools themselves, and then the quality management inside the business, also known as QMS. So you've got your generalized ERP functionality, which you find broadly across industries, and then you've got your specialized functionality, which is on the manufacturing side, which is known as an acronym as MES, or Manufacturing Execution Systems. So ERP, the thing about it as compared to most software applications is that it's so broadly touches people across the entire business or enterprise. Almost everybody within a manufacturing operation get touched by the ERP system. The owner, who's looking to profitably, grow the business. The finance people who are, insistent and necessarily they need to know the true cost of what they're making. You've got an IT team that's going to keep the system up and running unless it's in a hosted or SaaS situation. They want something that's easy to maintain and a low IT footprint, so to speak. Sales guys, they want to manage their orders and they want to keep their promises on product quality and delivery times. Inventory purchasing, they want to make sure all the raw materials available to run production. Engineering wants to see their designs go to final product. Production, they're charged with, you said you could make this for $14. Now, are you really making it for $14? And you said that, they're all going to be done by Friday. Is it going to be done by Friday? That's the shop floor piece of it, the MES piece of it. Quality goes without saying. I think we all understand the measurement, control, and documentation of quality. Something that does go a little under the radar is the maintenance and keeping the equipment running. Part of the manufacturing functionality is to know how many cycles a machine or a tool's got on it, how many hours equipment's got on it, and schedule the maintenance at the appropriate windows, and not let big jobs start when a maintenance period is going to come in the middle of the job, and keeping track of the spare parts and the service levels on the equipment. And then obviously the warehouse, which is shipping the right product to the right customer. So probably more people than even this are affected by ERP, but the point being, a broad number of people will have a stake in ERP. And if you're looking at the essentials, they're going to be slightly different by role or job in the business, and it's a good handy list to keep track of. So I'm going to go into the what you might call the 8 essentials of ERP. And the first one, in no particular order, but the first one that comes to my mind is accounts receivable. And you've got some people have 20 customers, some people have 300 customers, 400 customers in our space, but you've got to get them billed, and you've got to collect against those billings, right? And the old role of the bookkeeper, right, or the AR clerk, is to send out the invoices and collect them and make sure everything adds up and ends up in the cash drawer. With ERP, the billing is automatic upon shipment, particularly in our system, where we know that the warehouse shipped it because it's an end-to-end solution, and the very first step in the process knows what the very last step in the process is actually doing. So it's shipped, so it's time to bill. Things are typically sent electronically with an ERP system rather than through paper, or you can still do paper, obviously, but typically we see a lot of electronic invoicing. There's the aging reports. The guy hasn't paid in 60 days. He hasn't paid in 90 days. He hasn't paid in 120 days. He calls up. He says, "I want to place another order." You say, "Well, you haven't paid in 120 days." That kind of visibility through the accounts receivable solution. In matching of an invoice is I sent you an invoice for $10,000, and you call me up and you say, "Well, is this for the square boxes, or is this for the round kegs?" And you match the invoices and apply the payments to the right checks that you've received. Somebody calls up and says, "I never got that bill." The ability to quickly re-email an invoice, to just while you're on the phone, fax it to them, email it to them, however it goes, instead of having to go get a paper copy and redo that effort. And then throughout the entire process of accounts receivable, just the full knowledge of the customer. Uh, this guy buy from me once, he buy from me all the time. He's been a customer, for 10 years. He's been a customer for 2 years. Does he always pay in 120 days? All that kind of knowledge is at your fingertips with an ERP system. And for the AR department, it makes collections and billing and keeping the cash coming back into the business after you've shipped the goods highly efficient. At any one time, a business can have 4 million, $20 million business can have $4 million worth of AR outstanding. And, that cash has got to come from somewhere when it's outstanding, and some of it's borrowed. And if you're borrowing it from a bank, you're paying 5-10% for that money. And the longer you sit there and hold the invoices without receiving cash, the more interest you're paying. So with an ERP system, you can free up, a couple $1 million in cash, and you can free up a couple $100,000, $150,000 a year in interest fees if you can keep everybody current. So the accounts receivable system is an extremely valuable and essential part of why one invests in an ERP system. Just right up there in second place for common sense is inventory control. You've got raw materials sitting at one end of the shop, and you've basically got finished goods sitting at the other end of the shop, and you've got orders coming in all the time, and you need to have enough inventory to be responsive to those orders, but you don't want to have so much inventory that it gets old or sits on the floor and ages or deteriorates or just sits there with cash tied up in unused inventory. So our ERP system, a good ERP system, will forecast raw material needs basically based upon the bills of materials that have been entered for the things that you're making into the system. And therefore, if somebody regularly orders 10,000 of something every 2 months, and it takes 10,000 pounds of raw material to make that, the system forecasts that need and gets that material on hand in a timely fashion, but not too early, and it doesn't order too much of it. It looks at history, it looks at sales orders, and it calculates optimal stocking levels for raw materials. And then, of course, if somebody doesn't say, well, I used up 8,000 pounds of this material, if I used up 5,000 feet of this material, somebody could accidentally order more, right? So just as important as foreseeing the need for raw materials is the need to know that those raw materials have been consumed, so people don't think they're on hand and that they can be reordered in a timely fashion, and you can keep the yin and the yang of inventory, the pluses and the minuses, all in balance. Finished goods, a lot of people build to stock, and therefore knowing historical demand is important to predict. It's time to build another 8,000 of these finished goods and get them replenish the warehouse shelves, or that you got a big sales order and you're going to need to build so many of those a month for the next 12 months. Keeping track of the inventory for all of those moving parts is what an ERP system is designed to do, one of the key essential elements of it. Account for finished goods as soon as they're produced, tie that right back to what we talked about earlier on accounts receivable, where, okay, now I got them done, I'm going to ship them, let's get the bill out there. Similar concept to inventory above, finished goods. I just shipped 1,000, I'm down to 1,000. My reorder point, my remake point is 3,000, so I'm going to make some more. Again, keeping track of all those facts and figures in an automated fashion as compared to trying to keep track of them on paper is really at the essential heart of what ERP does. And inventory, a lot of people, they'll turn their inventory 2 times a year, right? That's really low. 4 times a year or more is a sort of a best practices inventory turn rates. And if you've got 6 million tied up in materials, and you're paying interest on that, or you're funding that $6 million in some way, and you can begin to turn that stuff 4 times a year rather than 2 times a year, you're going to free up like $3 million worth of cash, and whatever amount of money you're paying to in interest to carry that inventory. So like accounts receivable inventory control is a key ROI point for why somebody invests in an ERP system. All right, and next I will go on to quotes and estimates. So a big part of every manufacturer's day to day is the request for quotes and the request to do estimates. Some manufacturers more than other, but somebody comes with a drawing, they say, I'm going to need 20,000 of these. Somebody works up a quote, right? And an ERP system, what it does is you create your first quote, you create your second quote, and then someday you've created your 100th quote, right? And you've got all that history there. Last time something like this came in, I quoted about, $22, and boy, did I eat it on that one. It ended up costing me $26. So, you update that, and next time something comes in, you look at it and say, I think I got this nailed. Now I've done something like this before. It's super important to do the quotes and estimates on the machine using the actual cost of your inventory, the actual cost of your labor hours, the actual cost of your machine time, and then to have like and similar items to compare your new quote to, and that way you don't end up with quotes that are either so high that you don't get the business or so low that you end up losing money on it. And then once you've got a good cost thing, established a practice through quotes and estimating of getting your cost right, then you start to be able to fine tune your pricing, what you're actually going to charge for that. And you've got your history with your customer, what you charged for last time, what you think it's going to cost you this time, all of that stuff in an organized format, in a database where everybody can access it, leads to the repeatable accuracy of quotes and estimates. And being off, I don't need to do the math, but being off by 5% on a quote, typically of your costs are going to be 2/3 or 70% of what you charge somebody. So being off by 5% can throw a lot of air into predicted profits. And so the ability to get quotes and estimates right, document it, prove it, track it, refine it over time is a value of ERP, but it's a manufacturing best practice that can lead to $350,000, $400,000 a year improvement in bottom lines just from not making mistakes during the quote process. The next thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is standard cost, and it was hard to decide which to put first, quotes or estimates or standard cost. Conceptually, they're highly the same, but one has to come before the other, and so I put quotes first. But standard cost, best practices throughout most of manufacturing is, I know what I'm going to make, I know how much material it's going to consume, I know how many labor hours it's going to consume, I know how much machine time it's going to consume, I know how many I'm going to make per hour per day, I know I'm going to have some scrap. You add all that recipe up, and you get a standard cost. And then let's say the standard cost of an item one I used before is $14, right? And then you actually run production, and you use the MES portions and manufacturing portions of the ERP system to track what you actually did. You get done making 20,000 parts, and you look and you say, well, lo and behold, when it all said and done, this thing cost me $13.90, which was like excellent, right? I thought it was 14, I thought it was $13.90. But what if you didn't track it? What if you didn't know? What if the accountant thinks you're going to make $6 profit on that part, and it turned out the thing ended up costing you $19 to make? You only made $1. It jimmies up the whole financial system within the business and leads to consternation that doesn't need to happen. So setting up your standard cost, your bill of materials, tracking against your standard cost, refining your standard cost over time is one of the most, bedrock best practices that a manufacturer can have, and doing it on paper is almost impossible. However, doing it with an ERP system, particularly a manufacturing ERP system, can be one of the highest value points of ERP, the ROI of ERP in a business. And if you're a $20 million business, it's not unusual to see, before and after savings of $750,000 a year from actually dialing in standard cost, knowing what to charge for something, pricing it right, and not accidentally losing money because you didn't know how much time, energy, and materials you really had tied up in making a particular item. So again, an essential value of ERP. So another one that, really only an accountant could love, but I know plenty of accountants who do love it, is inventory evaluation. Inventory control, I mean, they're related in the sense that, you're keeping track of inventory, right? But this particular one is knowing the total value, the total dollar value of the inventory that you have on hand at any one time. It goes to promises you make the bank about, well, I've got this many assets in the building, so you can loan me $5 million and feel safe about it. It can go to how much taxes you're going to pay. It can go to what the plant manager promises the owner. But just a big thing that people like to know is inventory evaluation. And, there's really two ways to do it. You can count it at the end of the year and, put those little slips on everything and figure up how much inventory you got in the warehouse, both raw and finished goods. Or you can do it in a perpetual sense of this is what I brought in the door, this is what went out the door, therefore I know what I got inside the four walls in the warehouse on pretty much a day-to-day basis, right? And you check that, you spot check that, you do cycle counting, you check certain shelves, things like that. There's ways to check it, but what you're really looking for is to know pretty much on a day-to-day basis what your inventory evaluation is. And if you know your inventory evaluation and then you do spot check it and it turns out to be accurate, it's a really good indicator that everything that's coming in is being registered, everything that's going out is being registered, and everything that's happening in between is being recorded accurately. If those two things stay pretty close to each other, it's a great test of the procedures and processes that you have in place with the ERP system to make sure that everything is recorded in a timely fashion and rationalized in a timely fashion. So inventory evaluation is one, it's really important to the owners of the business, the people on the financial side of the business, and two, it's really important to the rest of the business as a bell cow for how well their processes are running within the business to actually keep track of everything else we talked about, such as standard cost and how accurate the quotes are and everything. So it's, again, an essential value of ERP. The next one is scheduling. And, mostly what I imagine when I talk about scheduling is, 20 machines, 30 machines, 40 machines, some assembly lines, maybe some secondary operations, but you've got this, this jigsaw puzzle of manpower, machines, and materials, and constrained by the promises that you've made your customers about, how many you're going to make and when they're going to be delivered, right? And in the old days, so there would be a scheduler, and he would take all that in and somehow magically keep track of 16 balls in the air at one time, and a lot of those guys could do that, but it's not a very scalable concept of having a person do that, and that's where scheduling and ERP and manufacturing come into play. Is that you've got you've got a cascading series of events. You've got an order, right? And it's got a quantity and it's got a due date and it's got a bill of material, right? and the ERP system is looking at all that, and then it's looking at the next order and the next order and the next order, and it's running different computations to determine what the optimal sequence to make everything is, when to have the materials disposition to the machine, when to have the labor at a machine, and it's fit that jigsaw to puzzle pieces together into a coherent picture, not just a bunch of jumbled pieces, right? And I would say that on our ERP system, the scheduling is probably one of the best bits of code that I've seen written in my entire career at ERP, because not only does it assemble that jigsaw puzzle coherently, it does it in real time. So if a customer calls up and says, I need to expedite this, like, you got to move this to Wednesday. Of course, that's going to have a cascading effect on a whole bunch of other orders, right? So it breaks Humpty Dumpty, and then the schedule, puts him back together again, all in one piece, and moves that one guy to Wednesday and shows you the impact on all the other customers. And can you live with that? Can you rob Peter to pay Paul? All those sort of thought processes. And if you can, then you accept that, and it repositions and redispositions everything necessary to put the production back on track with that one expedited scheduling. That ability to deal with unexpected events in real time is how you don't lose a lot of time on machine and labor hours to people being reassigned, because you can run those new schedules a little bit in advance and get them positioned without a lot of disruption. And you could just, I'm not saying this very well, but by being able to take into account all of the production factors, including things like which machines run a job the best, which tools run a job the quickest, you can expedite with minimal disruption of normal productive capacity. And when we talk about scheduling, it's hard to put a number on how much money is saved, but most plants will be running at between 70 and 75% of their actual capacity, because things are not well orchestrated. So by using ERP scheduling and using it on a regular basis, and knowing how it behaves, you can take a plant that maybe could make 100,000 pieces a day, and by getting it optimized, you can run 125, 130,000 pieces a day. So again, scheduling is a essential component of why people invest in an ERP system, and a key ROI value point. Quality control. This is probably the one area where I have the least hands-on experience. I've never really been a QC person, but I know the following from practical experience in factories is that quality is really a day-to-day practice that's been institutionalized in the business. You don't just make things for 10 hours without measuring to see if you're making them right. You don't just let things run for hour after hour without inspecting them. You check periodically, and you check in tiered checks. You have an operator who maybe checks every 10th part, and then you've got a supervisor who comes by and checks every 100th part. Then you've got a QA department that checks that these guys checked, and then checks a random sample, right? And the purpose being is to not let quality issues last more than maybe 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 parts before they're caught, and corrective action is taken. And so when you're running an ERP system, the manufacturing subsystem of an ERP system, really you've got an operator who is, the process can't proceed until the operator makes and records a measurement, right? Or it'll stop it, and it'll blow the whistle on them, so to speak, and alert a supervisor that we're not making the measurements here. And it's that closed loop feedback system that allows for quality to be institutionalized, and and the ERP system is the warden in that whole process of did you enter this value? Was it in range? If not, why haven't we stopped this process? It's constantly looking and looking and looking and inspecting itself to make sure that the inspectors are doing the inspections they're required to do. And then if there is a corrective action program, it's been written down, it's been documented, and it's being enforced in the same manner as I just spoke about a little bit before. And then a little bit in the sort of rear view mirror side of it is the statistical process control, where you're making, and maybe you're pulling off every 100th part or 10th part, whatever it is, and it's going into a lab, right? And it's saying that this weighed the right things, had the right dimensions, it had the right color, had the right finish. That's being recorded. The parameters I talked about, process parameters, the pressures, temperatures. I correlate the good parts. I say these are all good parts, and the pressure was 1,000 psi. That's all looking good. That's all looking good. And then suddenly, bad parts start to flow. Statistically, they say these are out of spec. These are out of norm. Something changed. A process that was predictable has now started to produce bad parts. You can go back to the SPC controls and measurements and say, well, at that same amount of time there, the cycle time on the machine went to 30 seconds from 20, and the pressure dropped to 750 psi, and this is when it occurred, and here's the root causes of why that occurred. Again, you could do that on paper, but it's really one of the core values of an ERP system to enforce and record and document all of those quality processes, and in doing so, ensure quality and provide a serious return on investment into the business. Because if we take our part that costs 20, we sell for 20, and it costs 14, and it's I'm making $6, right? But I got to make it again. I got to spend another 14. I just lost $8, right? So the enforcement of inline quality control, of proceduralized quality control, can wildly swing the profitability of a business upward, and it provides another essential ROI point in an ERP system. And then I have one more, which is customer service. And our system, and I didn't say a lot about it in the beginning, I'll say it now. I am speaking about our system in this case. It's an end-to-end solution, where it's one database, it's one set of code. It's each part of the system knows what's happened in the other part of the system. So there's a real-time flow of data from the warehouse. I just shipped this from the factory floor. I just consumed this raw material, all the way to the accounts payable, where I just paid this vendor and they're going to let me order more stuff. That whole interconnectedness is there. Nowhere does it raise its head in a positive fashion more often than when you're talking to a customer, right? A customer calls and says, when is this going to be done? You can look at it. It says it's going to be done 2 o'clock on Friday. When can I get another 1,000 of these? You can do capable to promise, and it'll say, well, you got the raw materials, I got the labor of the machine, I've changed schedule a little bit, but yeah, I can make those by that time. In the quality, it's like, can you provide me the temperature and pressure at the time this was made? My downstream customer wants to know, what was this? What batch of raw materials was this made with? When did you last ship it? What was my invoice? I could go on and on and on and on, right? But when you can pick up the phone or answer an email from a customer who needs a piece of information, and you have that information at your fingertips, it makes you a vendor of choice, because we've all done this in our own life. If you can call somebody up and get the answer you need, next time you want to buy that kind of good or service, that's the guy you call back, right? And in the end-to-end visibility of information, the information at your fingertips, the ability to print custom labels, you name it, is all part of what an end-to-end ERP solution provides a manufacturer and all the people within the manufacturing operation. and is another essential value point in or ROI, return on your investment in an ERP system, and another one of the 8 key reasons that people do invest in an ERP system. So I believe that's all 8 essential values. I'll say something about this really quickly because I know people want to get on with their day. ERP systems today are typically deployed in an on-premise situation where you put a server in your data center or your building, and you put the software on it, and you run it, and you kind of look after the systems yourself. Then the most popular current model is hosted with managed services. That's where, in our case, we put the server in a data center that we manage, and we put the software on it. We keep the database up to date. We keep the patches put down, the latest release levels. If there's ever any issue with disk space or any bugs or anything like that, then we fix all that. That's called hosted managed services. And historically, premise was the #1 way to go about things. Now it's everybody pretty much does is hosted with managed services. And then there's a third model, which is a SaaS model. In the SaaS model, the hardware footprint is obviously all managed by the vendor or by ourselves. And then, but instead of buying the licenses outright, as you do on premise or hosted, where you buy a perpetual license, in other words, typical 20 users, and you own those user licenses in perpetuity for your life, you simply rent those. So it's a subscription model, and you pay a subscription, periodically, say once a year, that covers the use of the licenses, the support, and the managed services. So clearly, today, I'll say one more time, the value point is on the hosted managed services for most people today. And implementation is obviously a big piece of it. Implementation is another word for teamwork. We have experts in the system, and you're expert in how you want to run your business. If you get the two together and they work in harmony, then implementations are fairly straightforward and take between 90 and 180 days, depending on the size of the manufacturer.
All right, thank you so much, Steve. We're now going to open it up to the audience for some questions. So our first question, Steve, is what is the value of an ERP system if all your business is made to order, i.e. custom, not made to stock?
Made to order is one of those middle terms that can mean 2 different things. If you're making highly customized machinery, then, and you're just making 1 or 2 of those at a time, then that's one system that you would look at. We call that ETO, engineer to order, and you'd look at systems aimed at engineer to order. We're a better fit for higher production runs. They can be made to order, right? But as long as you're making quite a bit of it at a time, films, extruded processes, custom jobs, all made to order, but often done in very high volumes. And of course, the strength of our system is making sure you've got the inventory provision for that, and that you monitor the production of that, and you know when it's going to be done and how much it costs you and everything. So if it's engineered to order, you probably want to look broadly for a system. If it's made to order and it's done in a repetitive or a high volume, long batch run kind of process, then we're a very good fit.
Awesome, thanks, Steve. Our next question regarding BOMs. We have multi-level BOMs and have been too complex for mainstream ERP. How do you handle them?
Well, we do our BOMs. You can have an infinite number of nested bills of material, and that can include, primary build, secondary operations, outsourcing. It's actually one of our strengths. We have people who make simple parts, and there's 1 or 2 pieces or a single piece to it, but we have a number of customers who make what I think of as finished goods assemblies, where the BOMs are fairly complex and fairly deep, and that's about half of our customers do that. And I consider BOMs a strength, and multi-level nested BOMs a strength of our product. So you want to make sure basically that the systems you're looking at can do multi-level bombs, and really there shouldn't be any limit to how nested they can be.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Our next question, you mentioned MES in relation to costing and relieving raw materials. How does MES capture that information?
Really that's so straightforward. It's fun to answer. We just talked about bombs, right? And that's a bill of manufacturing or bill of materials. It's a list of materials consumed during the process, labor consumed, machine time consumed. And when you're monitoring production, you're basically counting production cycles, and you're measuring the time each cycle runs. So if you're running a stamping machine, you know that it's running every 3 seconds, and every 3 seconds it's consuming so many pounds of material, and you've made a finished part. So if you add up the fact that you know the cycle time, and the material consumed during the cycle time, you can relieve inventory, raw materials inventory, and you can increase finished goods inventory, and you can predict when the job's going to be completed, because if you're going to make 10,000 of something and it's taking 2 seconds each, and you've made 8,000, you've got 4,000 seconds left before the job is going to be completed. And then often, referring back to the bill of materials, included in that is the changeover time. So the time the equipment will be down before the next job can be set up. But it really, really, really comes down to, if you're measuring cycles, production cycles, how many you need to do, how long they're taking, it's being used during them, and it allows you to predict and measure so many other things about the business that we consider that, sort of the essential value point. One of the essential value points of our system is that production monitoring.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Our next question in regards to forecasting, is that an optional module?
Yeah, forecasting is not something that everybody uses. So the way the system is packaged, there's a core set of modules, dozen add-on modules. Forecasting is one of those modules, and it's for people who where their demand cycles are fairly regular and predictable, and so it's looking out into the future about it's looking at the past really, and predicting the future based upon what the order cycles have been in the past, and how much material's been needed, and basically setting up the whole situation for future success by forecasting when you're going to need the tools, the people, the equipment, the raw materials, and everything that goes into a job. And a little bit, well, not a little bit, but quite a bit also looking at, how many do I have on the shelf? How many am I consuming in a month? When am I going to run out? What's my safety stock levels? Everything that goes into a sort of a forecast module, but it is optional.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, can you handle vendor managed inventory?
Yes, we can, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Vendor managed inventory is part and parcel of the day-to-day life in our environment.
Great. It looks like we just had a question come in from the audience. Is the system able to deal with multiple currencies? Where does it get the actual rate?
Yes, it deals with foreign currencies. Does it quite well. We have numerous customers who deal in different currencies across the world, and it normalizes them all back down to one currency that you probably want to report on. And then the currency rates, oddly enough, I can't answer where exactly we get those. I suspect they enter the conversion rates that they want to use at the time of the currency conversion. But I also know there's services out there we can connect to that will download currency rates. I think people do it different ways, but we do handle multi-currency.
Perfect. Well, it looks like that's all of our questions for today's webinar.
Thank you for viewing this pre-recorded webinar. For more information on DELMIAworks products and services, please visit 3ds.com/DELMIAworks.